Okay, great. Then, hi everyone, welcome back. We had a small technical glitch, so we'll continue from where we stopped. So we'll go back to the code and see how this REST API and registration logic is implemented. Okay, I hope everyone can see the code. So we will go through the autoscaler service implementation interface. So these are basically web services calls. So each method has exposed and web service. So first we have an service call to get all registered Kubernetes groups. So it will return a list of Kubernetes groups that are already registered. And then we have another one to get a specific Kubernetes group that is registered under specific Kubernetes group ID. And it will throw an non-existing Kubernetes group exception if this Kubernetes group ID is not found in the registry. And this get master for Kubernetes group service call will return a Kubernetes master object identified by a specific Kubernetes group ID. So as we discussed earlier, there is only one master in a Kubernetes group, and it will throw an non-existing Kubernetes group exception in case this Kubernetes group ID is not found. And we have get hosts for Kubernetes group. So this will return a list of Kubernetes host objects registered under a specific Kubernetes group. So it will again throw an unexisting Kubernetes group exception if this Kubernetes group ID is not there. And we have another one to add Kubernetes group. So if we pass a Kubernetes group object, it will add this Kubernetes group and also Kubernetes hosts and Kubernetes masters specified in that Kubernetes group object. So if the Kubernetes group request body is not up to the expected structure, it will throw an invalid Kubernetes group exception. So it's basically there are some validation rules that needs to be passed before adding this Kubernetes group. And again, another service call to add a Kubernetes host. So we have to pass the Kubernetes group ID and the Kubernetes host. So it will add this Kubernetes host object under a specific Kubernetes group. And another one to update Kubernetes host object. And
hi, Akhil.
Yes.
Hi, Akhil. Can you hear me?
Yes, Nirmal, you were going to say something?
I think Sajid has a question.
Yeah.
Let's go for him.
You also had a question, right? You go ahead first.
Okay, Akila, my question was, so you are returning Boolean, right? When would you return false? You are returning Boolean in the
Boolean
add and update.
Return is yes. So if the execution completes without any failures, then it will return true. Under any exceptional cases, like when if the validation fails, it will return false and it will not add this Kubernetes group and also it will
So
not
if the
update if the validation fails for the given object.
So if the validation fails, as I heard, you would return an exception, right? I think as far as I understand, there's
Yes.
no instance where you would return
Yes.
false,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. I agree with you. It should be void. Yeah. There's no point of returning a boolean.
Yeah, true.
Sajid, were
Yeah.
you going to say the same thing or?
No, actually, it's. I wanted to know what's the in. Do you have in Kubernetes host object? Do you have group ID as a parameter, as a property?
Yes. Yes. It's a field.
So can you go to the Kubernetes host object, please? I mean, it's the host ID. Okay. So my question was like, when adding, can I go back, please? Go back to the met operation. Okay. So when we are adding Kubernetes hosts, we are always adding it to a group ID. Is it?
This group ID is the Kubernetes group ID. So when we are adding a Kubernetes host, we are always adding it to a specific Kubernetes group.
Group.
Yes.
So what I'm thinking is whether do we need any. So how about so Kubernetes host is always associated with the Kubernetes group or the
Yes.
Kubernetes.
Yes. Every Kubernetes host has a Kubernetes only one Kubernetes group associated with it, and there's one and only one Kubernetes group for a specific Kubernetes host. And for a Kubernetes group, there can be 0 or more Kubernetes hosts associated.
Okay, so
So
don't we need to
you
have
get that
the
in the presentation. Yeah.
so don't we need to specify the property in the Kubernetes host? I mean, don't we need to have a Kubernetes group ID property in the Kubernetes host object?
But the hierarchy is we have a Kubernetes group, and under that we have Kubernetes hosts. So there's
Yeah,
an if you go to Kubernetes group,
yeah. Can you go to Kubernetes?
you can see that there's an array for Kubernetes hosts. So
Okay. All right. Okay.
Akila, Akila,
yes,
can you hear me?
yes,
Can
yes.
you, Akila, when removing the Kubernetes host, don't we have to specify the group in the removing of the?
No, because Kubernetes host ID is unique.
So it means the with
Because Kubernetes host ID is unique.
it is it is not within the so it can be live without a group, is it? Host. If there is a host, it should be a group, no?
No. A Kubernetes host cannot live without a Kubernetes group.
Yeah.
Yeah, there should be a Kubernetes group always.
Always. But
But you don't need the Kubernetes group ID to remove Kubernetes group host. Gayan, is it okay? Did you have any questions?
It means when we adding the Kubernetes host, we are specifying the what is the group it is, and updating what is the group it is. When we removing, we will remove it is without keeping the group ID, without worry about the grouping. I mean in the method declaration.
Sorry, Gan, I can't hear you properly. The voice is distorted. Can you type the question, please?
Yeah. Okay. How about now? Akila? How about now?
Or if someone else can repeat that.
I think you are going.
Yes.
You have your speakers on?
Yeah. Yeah. How about now, Akila?
I think now it's clear. Right?
Yeah. Can you hear now? Akila?
Still, it's
Not.
not really clear, but yeah, now it's manageable. Okay.
Akila, my question was when we add in the host, Kubernetes host, we are specifying the group, and updating the host, it's specifying the group. But when we are removing it is we are removing without a group, without considering group. Akila.
Now, when we are adding a Kubernetes host, we are specifying a Kubernetes group ID. So let me show you the API bit clearly, so you will get a better understanding. So can you see this REST API?
Yeah. Can see.
So you can say that when we are creating Kubernetes host, we are only specifying a Kubernetes group ID, and also we are passing the Kubernetes host object in the request body.
Yeah.
And when we are updating it, then we don't have to specify the Kubernetes group ID, because Kubernetes host ID is unique across all the hosts. So we don't need to specify the Kubernetes group ID when we are updating or removing it.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Then you mean when adding we only specify the host ID, then it will be not depend on the group. Host ID will be not depend on the group. It means same host ID can't be repeated in the two groups. Same group,
So
same host ID.
the Kubernetes host will so the Kubernetes host is always associated with a specific Kubernetes group.
Yeah.
So that's why when we are adding it, we are specifying the Kubernetes group ID for that Kubernetes host.
Yeah.
But once you associate a Kubernetes host with a specific Kubernetes group,
Yeah.
you can't change that dependency. So it will always be under that Kubernetes group. But you can change other parameters like IP addresses, properties, and all that.
Okay.
So because of that, when we are removing or updating Kubernetes host, we don't have to specify a Kubernetes group ID.
Okay. Then okay.
Akila, I think the API sounds like a bit confusing to when you look at the APIs. So that's why people get like a lot of misunderstandings and stuff like that, in my opinion. So I think we need to clean up the API a bit. So you create a Kubernetes group with multiple Kubernetes hosts in it, right? So for that you use Kubernetes/group, correct?
Yes.
And
Yes.
you use the method post and you pass a Kubernetes group object, right?
Yes.
And if you want to update the Kubernetes group with a new Kubernetes host,
You cannot update the Kubernetes group itself. Mm. Yeah, then you can add the Kubernetes host in that case.
okay, if I want to add a Kubernetes host to a particular Kubernetes group, I think the API should be something like Kubernetes/group/group ID
Yeah.
slash host slash slash host. That's all, and you post a host object to that particular URL. So if you use something like this, Kubernetes/host slash Kubernetes group ID, that doesn't sound correct. Seems like you under host you specify a Kubernetes group ID.
Yeah, I also agree with Nirma. So I think we should pass the
Yes. Yes. I think we
context.
can clean that
Yeah,
up a
we
bit.
should pass the context
Yeah.
what we are
I
doing in
think
the URL. On the operation should be a get put and whatever delete. You should pass the context from the URL.
Yes, and also I can see like we can have two APIs. One is like Kubernetes group API and one is Kubernetes host API. So, but what Kubernetes host API, since we have kind of a relation between group and host, we can't kind of add a new host, right? Since we don't have any reference to Kubernetes group. So we have two APIs, but in the host API, it's kind of limited to delete and get, as far as I can put maybe update. Yeah. So in the put, I think this should be post again when
I'm
you
sorry.
add an.
There's something network.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't hear?
The voice is a bit bit distorted.
Can
I
you hear?
think
Okay.
something wrong with the network.
Can you hear now?
Yeah, I can hear you, but sometimes I can only hear bits then and there.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. So I think this part should
That's fine.
be
Earlier.
slash Kubernetes slash group. Then you give the group ID, you select the group ID and then slash host. And then you do a post with the Kubernetes host object.
Okay. Yeah, I also think that's much cleaner than what is currently there.
Yeah, I think
Thanks, Nirman.
good.
I think that can be applied to other post uh, post APIs as well. Here we don't need the deploy, as you said earlier. Okay, moving on. So we were talking about adding a Kubernetes host and updating a Kubernetes host. So in the same way, we can remove an already registered Kubernetes group using the Kubernetes group ID. And in case that Kubernetes group is not already registered, then it will throw an non-existing Kubernetes group exception. And also the same way we can remove a Kubernetes host. But you are not allowed to remove a Kubernetes master. So you can only update a Kubernetes master object. So if you are going to remove a Kubernetes master, that means you are destroying the whole cluster. So in that case, you can remove the Kubernetes group ID itself, the Kubernetes group object itself. So so we will discuss about the autoscaler service implementation. So basically in this service implementation, uh, everything is handled by this Kubernetes manager object. So it's basically a controller class. Uh, so we'll move on to Kubernetes manager and see uh, how it is being implemented. So basically this is a singleton. So it will create only one Kubernetes manager instance from the autoscaler service implementation. So first it will get the Kubernetes manager instance, and let me go to the presenter view. So here we have certain validation methods. So first we will look at the Kubernetes group validation logic. So in a Kubernetes group, we saw that we have a Kubernetes group ID. Uh, so we have Kubernetes group ID and Kubernetes hosts and Kubernetes master object and a port range object and a description and properties. So So the Kubernetes group object cannot be null, and also Kubernetes group ID also cannot be null or blank, and it will check whether Kubernetes in Kubernetes host array whether every host is validated, and also in Kubernetes. So let me go to the uh, yeah. In when validating the port range, we are checking whether the upper limit and the lower limit are in the expected port ranges. So let me show you uh, a bit about the port range. So in port range we have two fields, that is upper and lower. So this basically tells the port range for which we can map container ports to host ports.
Akila, just a
So
small comment on
this
the
port range must be within 1 and 65,535. Yes.
hello.
Yes.
Akila, just a small comment on the port range object. I think we
Yes,
should
Nima. Please go ahead.
make. I think we should make the variables private, right?
Ah, yes, yes. Thanks, Nirmal. Yeah, it should be like that. Mm. So we were discussing the port range validation. So it should be within 1 and 65,535. So that's the valid port range we have. And if it is not within that range, it will throw this invalid uh, group exception. Also, it will validate the Kubernetes master object. In Kubernetes master validation, again it is calling the Kubernetes host validation because Kubernetes master is again is an Kubernetes host. So in Kubernetes host validation, the host object cannot be null, and the host ID cannot be null or empty, and the IP address cannot be null. So we are calling the Kubernetes API using this host IP address. So we have to validate with its valid TCP IP address. So we are using this um, Java API to validate this IP address. So that's it for validation stuff.
Akila,
So when we are adding a new,
Akila.
yes.
Yeah, can you go back to that validate the method that you were showing just now? I saw you were throwing so many exceptions, but you didn't lock any of them. Like, are they unique exceptions
Yeah, we
that
are.
we can?
Um,
Are they like kind of unique exceptions that we can identify
we are.
based on the logic where they execute? So like.
We are actually when we are throwing, and we are actually passing it upstream those exceptions,
Yeah.
and we are logging it at the actual method invocation. So that is when we are adding Kubernetes group, or when you are calling the validate Kubernetes group.
Okay, so if you log like.
So this is called by. So this method is invoked by the autoscaler service implementation. So at the end, it will throw that. So we will get that error in our error log.
Okay, so just my thought. So
So
in case if you are like calling recursive methods and like when you are calling recursively in two places, if the same exception is getting thrown or something like that, then at the end in the upstream we may lose the information from where the same exceptions from where it is actually originated. So in that case, if you log, it would be better. But
we can.
I'm still not sure like your flow. If there are like unique exceptions and the same exception is not thrown in two places, then it's okay. Maybe if you could find
Well,
out the, yeah.
we can track the. We will get the stack trace because we are passing the exception object itself for
Okay.
So basically, I was following the pattern that has been implemented in other registration flows as well. When we are registering partitions, we have followed the same pattern. So we are passing the message in this exception, and uh, we are passing the exception object itself upstream, up the chain. So we will get the stack trace when it is being thrown.
Okay, but we usually like lock and throw the exception, but I'm still not sure why exactly we are doing that. But it would be better if we lock and throw. But in your case, since it is like unique exception, it may be fine. Do others have any thought on this?
Yeah, I also think it would be better if we lock the at least the error message when we are throwing it. Any comments on that?
I think. Hello. Hi, Akila.
Yes.
Yeah, my idea is like it depends, right? I mean, if we log and throw the exceptions, so that we'll get the same log every, like, I mean, kind of duplicates. If we log here, and uh, we will be logging in this place where we'll catch the exception as well. So that case, my idea is we'll get duplicate error messages, isn't it? Like, I mean,
Uh, yeah, that
if we log
could be
here,
the case. But if we log the error message only here, will we get some clarity when we are examining the error log? So we'll have the error message, only the error message in a specific place. So error message won't be long, right? So just my opinion.
in this case, why are you catching invalid Kubernetes host exception and throwing invalid Kubernetes group exception?
Because we are validating the Kubernetes group, so we have Kubernetes master and Kubernetes hosts array in the Kubernetes group class. So if any of those are invalid, then we are passing, because if the Kubernetes host is invalid, that means the Kubernetes group is also invalid. So we are
Yeah,
passing the Kubernetes uh, invalid Kubernetes group exception, and we are wrapping the error message that we got from the invalid Kubernetes host exception. So basically, we are throwing it up the chain.
yeah.
Is it okay?
So Attila, I think this is a typical example of like when to do log and throw, and when not to do log and throw. So if you log in the before you catch the invalid Kubernetes host exception, if you log the message at the place where you throw the exception, then you would duplicate the same log, right? Hello.
Yes, Imran, we can hear you.
Okay, I hope Attila can hear as well. Uh, so yeah, I think
would
in this
happen,
kind of a
but
scenario, we shouldn't lot.
will
Yes, right.
We shouldn't
we
lot.
get some clarity in the error log if we log?
Yeah, so even I believe that we should not run through it always.
Okay,
But in this kind of a scenario where you throw and catch at the same place,
okay,
if you log the message, you would get the same message twice, right? That doesn't make sense to do that, in my opinion. So, but why you need to log and throw, as long as always as possible is this particular component resides in one server, and you have the client in another server or something like that. Then uh, and also the message, uh, for this particular component, for this particular code, the message you would give can be a
can't
different
hear you
one.
properly.
You can't hear? Can others hear me properly?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So yeah,
Yeah, I think I got just to what you said. If we are when you are throwing a new exception, if we are throwing a separate different message, then yeah,
yeah. So in summary, we should log and throw as always as possible, but we should be careful not to repeat the same message, in the stat trace. But in my opinion, it's different from component to component. But if you do throw and catch the same exception in the same part, same code segment, then you shouldn't be logging uh, each time.
yeah. So if I pass in the same message here from what we are already caught, so no need to log here. But if we are throwing with a different message, then we should log the uh, exception message that we have already caught. Am I correct to assume that?
Yes, but you should at least log once. So in this case, you haven't logged, you know, either place, right? So I think you should log the message at least in one place. I'm not. I think it should be the the most outer layer. You should log the message. Probably. I'm not sure about that, but at least once you a particular code segment, in my opinion. Then you could easily move this particular code to some other server and do and still get the get the error messages.
Okay. Thanks, Nirmal.
Achilles, can you go to the place where I throw the invalid Kubernetes host exception in the previous method you showed?
Kubernetes host exception. This one. Validate Kubernetes host.
Uh, okay, so this is the place it throws the invalid Kubernetes host. Okay, fine. Thanks. I just wanted to know in which method it throws. So validate group catches this exception and throws validate group exception, right? Hello, Akila.
Seems like he's experiencing network issues.
Yeah, I think so.
I can hear you real time, but I feel he's hearing us with a lag.